April 10th, 1936. 9:47 p.m. Lucky Luciano was dining with a man he trusted more than anyone in the world, Vito Genovese. The man who'd fought beside him for 15 years, the man who knew his secrets, his plans, his weaknesses, the man who'd just made a phone call that would change everything. Lucky Luciano didn't know it yet, but this dinner was an execution waiting to happen, not with bullets, with betrayal. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand what Lucky Luciano had built. In 1931, the mob was a dying institution. The old bosses, the mafiosi from Sicily, they operated like dinosaurs, territorial, brutal, inefficient, shooting each other in the streets while the feds watched and the profits disappeared. They called themselves a family, but they fought like enemies. Lucky saw this and saw an opportunity. He didn't want to destroy the mafia. He wanted to reorganize it, modernize it, make it rational. So with Meyer Lansky, a Jewish gangster who understood numbers better than anyone, Lucky created something unprecedented. The Commission, a board of directors for organized crime. Each family got territory. Each family got rules. You didn't shoot without permission. You didn't move without consensus. You didn't take action that endangered the whole organization. It was brutal and elegant at the same time. For the first time in the history of American organized crime, there was peace, and peace meant profit, unprecedented profit. By 1936, Lucky Luciano was the most powerful criminal in America, not the loudest, not the most violent, the most powerful. He controlled the docks of New York, gambling operations stretching from Manhattan to Florida, prostitution networks, drug distribution. The FBI had him under surveillance constantly. They wanted him desperately, but they couldn't touch him. Not because he was untouchable by law, because he was untouchable by his own people. Every boss on the commission owed him something. Every street soldier knew that crossing Lucky meant death from 1,000 directions at once. Vito Genovese was different. Vito was old money mafia, came from Naples, Sicily side of the organization. He'd been there since the beginning, watching Lucky consolidate power, watching Lansky do the calculations, watching the empire grow. And Vito understood something that Lucky perhaps underestimated. Power is not given, it's taken. Vito watched wealth accumulate in Lucky's hands and felt something growing inside him. Resentment, ambition, the kind of hunger that doesn't eat, it consumes. By 1936, the FBI was closing in. They had evidence on Lucky, prostitution charges, the ones that would stick, 30 counts, 10 to 20 years minimum. Lucky knew it was coming, knew that within weeks or months they'd move. He needed to consolidate, to put his affairs in order, to make sure that when he went inside, the organization would survive and his position would remain secure. That's why he called the meeting. That's why Vito Genovese sat across from him at Erickson's restaurant on West 54th Street in Manhattan. The restaurant was exclusive, private dining room upstairs. No one got in without permission. No one could see through the frosted glass windows. Perfect place to talk business. Lucky ordered sole. Vito ordered steak. They drank wine, Chianti. And they talked about the future, the structure. Who would run which territory while Lucky was inside? How the money would flow. How his interests would be protected. Vito listened. Vito nodded. Vito smiled the smile of a man who'd already made his decision. See, what Lucky didn't know was that Vito had been contacted by a man named Burton Turkus, a Jewish prosecutor with the New York District Attorney's Office, a man who'd been building a case against Lucky for months. And that case needed a witness. That case needed someone from inside, someone who knew the operations intimately, someone like Vito Genovese. The FBI couldn't break Lucky through evidence alone. They needed testimony, and Vito, sitting across from his partner, his friend, his boss, was working with the prosecution. This wasn't political. This wasn't ideology. This was chess played with human lives as pieces. Vito knew that if he testified against Lucky, Lucky would eventually be convicted. And with Lucky inside, the power structure would shift. The commission would need a new leader, someone ruthless enough to hold it together, someone like Vito Genovese. One conversation with Turkus, one agreement. That was all it took. And now Vito was doing what he did best, acting. Lucky talked about his philosophy, about how the organization had to be bigger than any one man, about how his potential imprisonment was not a crisis, but a transition, about how the structure he'd built was strong enough to survive his absence. And Vito listened with the attention of a devoted lieutenant. He asked the right questions. He made the right comments. He was everything Lucky needed him to be. The trusted lieutenant, the reliable right hand, the brother in arms. They finished dinner around 11 p.m. Lucky had wine and a cigar. Vito had ordered espresso. They discussed final details, money transfers, certain judges who needed to be reminded of their obligations, certain cops who needed to be paid, the machinery of corruption that kept everything functioning. And then Vito excused himself. He needed to make a phone call. Something had come up. He'd be back in a few minutes. Lucky nodded, unbothered. Vito had always been reliable. Vito had always been discreet. Vito went to the hallway. He picked up the phone, and he made one call to a number in the DA's office. One sentence. The target is in place. One sentence. And at that moment, Lucky Luciano's fate was sealed. Vito returned to the dining room, sat back down, smiled and waited. The silence stretched. Vito knew the police would be coming any moment, knew they were staging outside, getting into position, knew they were preparing to rush the building, knew that when that door opened, Lucky Luciano would be arrested. And Vito Genovese would be the man who delivered him, the man who'd been sitting across from him the entire time, the man he'd trusted with his life, the man who'd orchestrated his downfall while eating steak and drinking wine. Lucky was talking about something, about future operations, about how the commission would evolve, about expansion into Las Vegas. Vito was watching his lips move, watching the confidence in his eyes, watching the trust. And Vito understood something fundamental about power. The moment you trust someone, absolutely, is the moment you're vulnerable to betrayal. The moment you believe in loyalty from someone is the moment they can destroy you most effectively. The door burst open, police officers in suits, badges. The moment was violent and sudden. Lucky stood immediately. He wasn't shocked. He was already planning, already calculating. His mind moved toward understanding. How did they know? Where was the leak? He looked at Vito. And in that moment, just for a flash, Vito's mask slipped. Not much, just a fraction of a second. But Lucky saw it. Lucky understood. They put handcuffs on Lucky Luciano. They read him his rights. They told him he was under arrest for compulsory prostitution, for operating a vice enterprise, for crimes against the state of New York. And Lucky was quiet, cooperative even, because he was thinking, he was processing, he was understanding the architecture of his own betrayal. Vito Genovese, standing in that room, watched them take Lucky away, and Vito did not smile. That would have been crude. That would have shown weakness. Instead, Vito straightened his jacket and walked downstairs to the restaurant. Over the next weeks, Vito testified before the grand jury. He provided details about Lucky's operations, about the prostitution network, about the money flowing through it, about Lucky's personal involvement. His testimony was clinical, devastating, damning, each word another nail in the coffin, each detail another year added to the sentence. And Vito Genovese, the trusted lieutenant, became the key witness in the case that would put Lucky Luciano away for a decade. Lucky was convicted in June of 1936. 30 counts, 50-year sentence initially, eventually reduced to 30 years. But he would serve 10 before conditions changed, before he could make a deal with the government to be deported. 10 years in prison because of the man he trusted most, because of Vito Genovese, the man who'd sat at his table, the man who'd listened to his plans, the man who'd betrayed him not out of coercion or desperation, but out of pure, calculated ambition. What's remarkable about this story is not just the betrayal itself, it's what happened after. Vito Genovese became the boss of the Genovese family. He took over Lucky's territory. He expanded the empire. He consolidated power. He won. For years, he was successful. The betrayal had worked perfectly. And then something happened that Vito didn't anticipate. Lucky Luciano didn't break in prison. Lucky Luciano didn't disappear into obscurity. Lucky Luciano kept operating. He kept thinking. He kept planning. From inside the prison walls, Lucky made allies. He contacted Meyer Lansky. He reached out to other bosses on the commission, and he made them understand something fundamental. Vito Genovese was unstable. Vito Genovese was ambitious to a fault. Vito Genovese had betrayed one of them, which meant he could betray any of them. And the commission, the institution that Lucky had built, suddenly saw Vito Genovese as a threat to its very existence. Lucky had built his power on the principle of collective interest, and Vito had violated that principle. In 1959, Vito Genovese was arrested on drug charges. The same organization that had let him operate freely suddenly found evidence of his involvement in a heroin distribution network. The same judges that he'd paid off suddenly became unreliable. The same police connections that he'd cultivated suddenly became hostile. And Vito Genovese, the man who'd orchestrated the fall of Lucky Luciano, was convicted. He died in prison in 1969. The man who'd climbed on top of Lucky's corpse found himself buried in a cell, abandoned by the very organization he'd destroyed his mentor to lead. And Lucky Luciano. After 10 years inside, he was deported to Italy in 1946. He spent the rest of his life in Naples, in exile, away from the empire he'd built. But he remained relevant, remained feared, remained respected, because he'd done something that Vito Genovese never understood. He'd built an organization bigger than himself. He'd created a system that didn't depend on his presence to function. And when he was removed, that system continued. And eventually, that system judged Vito and found him wanting. The lesson of this story is not about loyalty. It's not about honor among thieves. It's about understanding that every betrayal contains the seeds of its own destruction. Vito Genovese won the battle. He arrested Lucky. He took the power. He became the boss. But he lost the war because he betrayed the principle that Lucky had established, the principle that collective interest supersedes individual ambition, the principle that the organization is more important than the man. And the commission, the institution that Lucky built, eventually enforced that principle by turning on the man who'd violated it. April 10th, 1936. Two men sat at a dinner table. One trusted the other with his life. That trust was weaponized. That trust became the instrument of destruction. And in that moment when the police burst through the door, an empire began its transformation, not because of bullets, not because of violence, but because one man's ambition exceeded his understanding of the system he was part of. And that system, in the end, protected itself, not by defending Lucky Luciano, but by destroying Vito Genovese. Sometimes betrayal is its own punishment. Sometimes the knife you drive into your mentor's back eventually gets turned on you, and the man you thought you'd destroyed remains from a prison cell thousands of miles away, more powerful than you ever became.